There is a specific kind of tired that comes not from doing too much, but from never quite finishing anything. The laundry sits half folded on the couch. The kitchen counter got wiped, but the stove was left for later. A phone call was supposed to be made, a drawer was supposed to be sorted, an errand was supposed to get done before noon, and now it is 4 in the afternoon, and the whole day feels like it slipped through without producing anything you can actually point to. That feeling is not laziness. It is what happens when a day has no shape. A 1950s home, at its best, ran differently on a Tuesday than it did on a Monday or a Thursday. Each day had its own rhythm, its own set of jobs, and its own quiet sense of direction. Not because every woman loved structure for its own sake, but because a home with a shaped day felt fundamentally different from one where everything was vaguely important and nothing had a clear turn. Tuesday, in many households of that era, carried a very specific weight. Monday had already opened the week. The laundry was either started or sorted. The mental list of what needed to happen before Sunday was already forming. Tuesday was the day when a woman decided whether the week was going to run smoothly or whether it was going to start quietly slipping behind. That is the part nobody ever really talks about. Not the cleaning, not the cooking, but the invisible act of keeping a house moving without rushing, without crisis, and without the feeling that everything important is always waiting to be done tomorrow. If you enjoy rediscovering the kind of daily wisdom that used to be passed along quietly in kitchens and over back fences and through years of simply watching someone else do it right, stay with us and consider subscribing. We are spending the next few minutes inside a 1950s Tuesday, walking through the habits that made one ordinary day in the middle of the week into the quiet engine that kept the whole house running. And before we begin, one honest word. The women who built these routines were not superhuman, and they were not always happy doing it. Many carried more than their fair share of the household's invisible work. What we are looking at today is not a model of how life should be divided. It is a look at how a set of practical systems, built quietly over years, created something that most modern homes still search for. A day that moves without panic and ends without the feeling that tomorrow is already behind. Let us begin where Tuesday always began. Number 1. She did not start Tuesday until Monday night was finished. This is the habit that most people miss entirely, and it is the one that made everything else possible. In many 1950s homes, the work of Tuesday actually began the evening before, not dramatically, not for hours, but in the quiet after dinner, before the house went still. A woman would take a few minutes to look ahead. She knew what Tuesday needed to hold, and she arranged the house to make it easier before she went to sleep. The things needed for a Tuesday errand sat by the door. A grocery list was written out completely, not left as a half-formed thought to be figured out in the morning. If ironing was on the schedule, the items that needed pressing were already gathered. If a dish was planned for dinner, any dry goods it required were moved to the counter where they could be seen. None of this sounds significant, and taken alone, each action was not. But together, They removed Tuesday's most dangerous enemy before Tuesday even arrived. That enemy is the morning decision. Every time a person wakes up and has to figure out what they are doing next before they have fully woken up, the day loses ground. The small, quiet preparation done Monday night meant that Tuesday morning had direction before anyone had poured their first cup of coffee. Modern life rarely allows for this. People fall asleep mid-scroll, mid-thought, mid-episode, with the day still open and unfinished behind them. And Tuesday morning begins not where Monday night ended, but somewhere further back, trying to reconstruct a plan that was never quite made. The old habit simply moved some of that mental work to the quieter evening before, so the next morning had a head start instead of a hole to climb out of. Number 2, the morning did not begin in a hurry. A Tuesday morning in a well-run 1950s home was almost never rushed. Not because there was less to do, there was often considerably more. But the shape of the morning was protected, because a rushed morning creates a particular kind of damage that echoes through the entire rest of the day. A woman moving in a hurry in the kitchen tends to leave behind her. A hurried breakfast means dishes stay on the table. A hurried school send-off means a backpack is missing something. A hurried start to a morning errand means the grocery list is sitting on the counter at home. Each small rush creates a small gap, and those gaps accumulate until by noon the day feels 2 steps behind, without any single obvious reason why. Instead, the morning moved deliberately. Children were woken early enough that they had time to move slowly. Breakfast was made and eaten, not grabbed and abandoned. The bed was made before any other task began. The kitchen was tidied before anyone left the house for an errand, not left with the intention of returning to it before it hardened. The habit was not to rush less because the day was easier. The habit was to protect the morning's pace deliberately, because the morning sets the tone for every hour that follows it. A calm start does not guarantee a calm day, but a frantic start almost guarantees a difficult one. Number 3, Tuesday had one main task, and it was named. One of the clearest differences between a productive Tuesday in the 1950s and a modern Tuesday that somehow produces nothing is that the older one had a named priority, not a list of 12 equally important things. One thing that was the day's anchor. In many households, Tuesday carried the laundry that Monday had started, or it was the day set aside for deep cleaning a particular part of the house that was not touched every day, or it was market day, the one morning each week when fresh food was purchased and the pantry was restocked thoughtfully. The specific task varied by household, but the principle was the same. This day has one main job. Everything else that happens works around that. This mattered enormously for a reason that still applies today. When every task on a list has equal weight, the mind does not know where to begin. It bounces, it delays, it starts 3 things and finishes none of them. But when there is one named task that the day belongs to, the mind settles. Everything else that needs to happen gets fit around it instead of competing with it. A 1950s woman who knew that Tuesday was ironing day did not spend Tuesday morning wondering what to do first. The ironing board was already up, The clothes were already gathered, and everything else in the day was arranged to support that one task being completed, not interrupted. Number 4. The kitchen was closed after breakfast. This sounds almost rigid now, but it solved a problem that modern kitchens face constantly. After breakfast in a well-run 1950s home, the kitchen was finished. Dishes were washed and put away. The counter was wiped. The stove was checked. The dish towel was hung straight. And then the kitchen was, in a practical sense, closed until the preparations for lunch began. This mattered because a kitchen that is never quite closed becomes a kitchen that is never quite clean. If a cup is left from breakfast, and then another cup joins it from mid-morning, and then a plate appears from a snack nobody officially acknowledged having, by noon, the kitchen looks like a full morning's worth of dishes, even though nobody cooked a real meal. The room has been bleeding mess quietly all morning, and cleaning it up now feels like starting over. The old habit prevented this by treating the after-breakfast cleanup as a non-negotiable ending. Not a cleaning day, not a production, just the simple act of finishing what breakfast created before the next thing began. A closed kitchen is also a kitchen that stays ready. When lunch needs to be made, there is clear counter space. When a neighbor stops by, there's nothing to be embarrassed about on the way to the coffee cups. The room did not require preparation before it could be used. It was already prepared because it was finished instead of left open. Number 5. Laundry moved forward on a schedule, not on inspiration. If Tuesday was a laundry day in the household, it was not treated as an option. The clothes that had been sorted went into the wash when it was time, not when the basket finally became impossible to ignore. This distinction matters more than it sounds. Laundry done on a schedule moves through the house in a predictable rhythm. Washed, dried, folded, returned to drawers and closets, all within the same day or two, because it never stops moving long enough to become a problem. Laundry done on inspiration instead of rhythm tends to stall. It washes well enough, but then it sits in the machine a little too long. Then it moves to the dryer, but comes out slightly wrinkled. Then it ends up in a basket on the bedroom floor for 3 days, while everyone picks from it like a clothing buffet, until nothing is folded and the whole process feels more exhausting than it should. A 1950s woman running laundry on schedule also ran it with less, which helped enormously. Fewer clothes in a household meant that if Tuesday's wash did not happen, Wednesday morning had genuine consequences. A child did not have a clean uniform. A husband did not have work clothes. That natural pressure kept the rhythm honest in a way that a household with 2 weeks' worth of backup clothing rarely has to face. The habit worth carrying forward is not the pressure. It is the rhythm. Laundry that moves on a fixed day through the house, from dirty to clean to folded to put away, is laundry that never becomes the looming weekend-destroying pile that modern households know too well. Number 6. She straightened before she cleaned. This is one of the more overlooked habits of the well-run home, and it made an enormous practical difference. Before any actual cleaning happened on a Tuesday, a woman would first go through the relevant rooms and return everything to where it belonged. Books went back on shelves. Shoes went to the entryway. A sweater draped over a chair went to the closet or the hamper, depending on whether it had been worn. A toy was returned to the child's room. A newspaper was folded and placed in its spot. Only once the room was straightened did the actual cleaning begin. This mattered because cleaning around clutter is deeply inefficient, and it also produces a result that never quite looks right. You can vacuum a rug beautifully, but if the floor around it is scattered with objects, the room still looks messy. You can wipe a counter thoroughly, but if it is covered with things that belong somewhere else, the kitchen still feels chaotic. The cleaning disappears under the clutter, and the effort feels wasted. Straightening first meant that the cleaning that followed could actually be seen. A vacuumed room with clear floors looks vacuumed. A wiped counter with nothing on it looks wiped. The work showed because nothing was hiding it. Modern cleaning often skips this step, which is why so many people clean and still feel like the house does not look clean. The order matters. Straight first, then clean. The house will look twice as good for the same amount of effort. Number 7. Ironing was done all at once, not one piece at a time. If Tuesday was ironing day, the iron came out once, and every piece that needed pressing went through it in a single session. Then every piece was hung, folded, and returned before the iron was put away. This sounds obvious, but it stands in sharp contrast to the way modern ironing tends to work, which is reactively, one shirt at a time, 10 minutes before someone needs to leave, while standing in the bedroom in some degree of mild panic. A single contained ironing session was more efficient for several practical reasons. The iron was at temperature the whole time. Everything moved from wrinkled to pressed to put away in one continuous motion, rather than starting and stopping a dozen times across a week. The room the ironing happened in was disrupted once instead of constantly. And when the session ended, it genuinely ended. The basket was empty, the board was put away. The task was finished. This is the larger habit embedded inside the smaller one. In a well-run 1950s home, tasks were contained. They had a beginning, a middle, and an end within a single session, if possible. This kept the house from feeling like it was always mid-task, always slightly unfinished, always holding the evidence of work in progress that never quite concluded. Number 8. The midday break was actually a break. In many 1950s homes, there was a genuine pause in the middle of the day. Lunch was made and eaten. Children who came home from school were fed. A woman might sit for 15 or 20 minutes with a cup of tea and a quiet moment before the afternoon began. This was not laziness built into the schedule. It was a deliberate reset. A person who works without pause through a long day loses efficiency gradually and loses it invisibly. The afternoon tasks take longer than they should. Small decisions become harder. Patience wears thinner. Mistakes get made that require correction. The work continues, but the quality quietly drops. And by the time dinner needs to be started, the energy needed for it has been quietly spent somewhere in the middle of the afternoon on tasks that took twice as long as they should have. A planned midday pause protected against this. It acknowledged that the day was long, that the work was real, and that a woman who rested briefly in the middle of the day would do the second half better than one who pushed through without stopping. Modern productivity culture has largely abandoned this idea in favor of maximizing working hours, and the result is often a kind of burnout that comes not from doing too much, but from never pausing long enough to restore the focus needed to do anything well. The 1950s midday break was not a reward. It was maintenance. Number 9. The afternoon belonged to the children and the next day. After the midday pause, a Tuesday afternoon in many households shifted naturally in its purpose. The heavy housework of the morning had been done. What remained in the afternoon was lighter and more forward-looking. Children coming home from school needed something to eat and someone paying enough attention to know whether the day had gone well or badly. A woman with energy left in the afternoon could give them that. She could sit for a few minutes, ask the right questions, and know what the evening would need before it arrived. And while children settled into homework or outdoor play, the afternoon could hold the smaller forward tasks that kept the next day from starting behind. A grocery item noted as running low could be added to a list. A phone call that needed to be made could be made. A button that had fallen off a shirt could be sewn back on while the light was still good, so the shirt was ready when it was needed instead of being discovered missing something important at the worst moment. This is the habit that most clearly separates a home that runs from a home that reacts. The reactive home only deals with problems once they arrive. The running home sees them coming a day or two ahead and removes them before they become emergencies. Tuesday afternoon in a well-organized 1950s household was when a great deal of that quiet, invisible prevention happened. Number 10. Dinner preparation started earlier than felt necessary. A Tuesday dinner in the 1950s home rarely came together in a last-minute scramble, not because the food was simpler, but because the woman running the kitchen understood something about time that modern life frequently ignores. Preparation started earlier than it seemed to need to. If dinner needed to be on the table at 6, a woman might begin at 4 or 4:30, not because everything took that long, but because beginning early created a buffer. A pot that needed to simmer had time to simmer. A dish that needed an hour in the oven did not require anyone to wait until 7 to eat. If something went slightly wrong, there was room to fix it. And beginning early meant the kitchen did not suddenly need to produce a full meal, while simultaneously helping with homework, answering the door, and managing whatever the last hour of the day tends to bring in any household. Modern dinner often happens the other way around. The evening creeps forward, the hunger gets louder, the decision about what to cook is made too late, and dinner becomes a high-speed effort that leaves the kitchen in worse shape than a calmer start would have. Everyone eats later than intended and goes to bed slightly more wound up than they might have. Beginning earlier than necessary was not a luxury. It was a form of respect for the end of the day, a refusal to let the last few hours become chaotic simply because the kitchen had not been given enough time. Number 11. She never let a room leave her worse than she found it. This was one of the unspoken rules of the 1950s home. so deeply embedded in the daily rhythm that many women would have struggled to articulate it if asked. But it ran underneath everything. Every time a woman left a room, she left it at least as orderly as she had found it, and whenever possible, slightly more so. Moving from the kitchen to the living room, she straightened a cushion on the way. Coming back upstairs after checking the laundry, she brought with her the cup that had been sitting on the landing for 2 days. Walking past the hallway table on the way to answer the door, she moved the keys to where they belonged. Each small correction took 3 seconds and left the house infinitesimally better. Over the course of an entire Tuesday, dozens of these 3-second corrections happened quietly, invisibly, without being called cleaning. And by the end of the day, the house was not in perfect condition because it had been cleaned from top to bottom. It was in good condition because it had been continually, gently corrected all day long in 100 small moments that never added up to a chore. This is perhaps the most transferable habit on this entire list because it requires no schedule, no special time, and no particular energy. It only requires the decision to leave things slightly better than you found them as you move through your own home every single day. Number 12. The children's contribution was expected, not negotiated. In a well-run 1950s household, children were not guests in a hotel that happened to have people their age living in it. They were members of a household, and that membership came with responsibilities that were not optional. These were not large responsibilities. Plates were carried from the table to the kitchen after meals. Shoes were put where they belonged. Homework was done at the homework spot, not wherever someone happened to drop a backpack. A toy taken out was expected to return to its place before the next one came out, at least in the common areas of the house. The expectation was not enforced through lectures or negotiation every single time. It was simply part of what the house was. The rhythm made the expectation clear, and children in these homes often absorb the habit without being consciously aware of having learned anything. This is not about being strict for its own sake. It is about what happens to a household when only one person is responsible for tidying after everyone else in it. The work becomes unmanageable. The resentment builds quietly, and the person doing it gradually loses the energy and motivation that made the whole system work. Small contributions from every person in the house, expected calmly and consistently from an early age, changed the mathematical reality of maintaining a home. A 1950s woman running a household did not do it alone because she was made for it. She did it more manageably when the household understood that it belonged to everyone. Number 13. Surfaces were reset before dinner. In the hour before dinner was served, many 1950s women moved quickly through the main rooms of the house in a brief reset that prepared the space for the evening. It was not a full clean. It was a final straightening before the second half of the day began. The living room had its cushions arranged. The dining table was cleared of anything that had accumulated on it during the afternoon. Homework papers, mail, items waiting to go upstairs, so that it was ready to hold dinner without first needing to be excavated. The bathroom was given a quick check. Shoes near the door were moved. Coats were hung. The entire reset might take 10 minutes, but it meant that the family sat down to dinner in a home that felt like it had been cared for that day, not like it had been slowly dismantled since morning. This habit also protected the evening from starting with the low-grade stress that an untidy house produces without anyone naming it. When the rooms people spend the evening in are already in order before dinner is served, the evening begins from a place of ease rather than a place of mild underlying chaos. Small as that sounds, it changes how people feel for the last few hours before bed. Number 14. Dinner was eaten without distraction. In the 1950s home, dinner at the table was rarely optional and rarely rushed. It was one of the few moments in the day when everyone in the household was in the same room, doing the same thing at the same time. There was no television playing in the background. No one ate in a different room. The phone, if it rang, could wait. And in that ordinary Tuesday evening dinner, something important happened that is harder to reproduce today. The family checked in, not formally, not with a structured agenda, but through the simple, reliable act of sitting across from one another with food between them. People heard how each other's days had gone. Problems that needed to surfaced. Connections that needed to be made were made. The household that had been running independently all day came back together. This is why so much research on family connection points back to the shared meal as the single most consistent factor in households where people feel genuinely known by one another. It was not magic in the 1950s, and it is not magic now. It is simply what happens when people regularly occupy the same space long enough to be present with one another. A distracted dinner eaten in separate rooms or over separate screens is not a failure of character, but it is a missed opportunity repeated every evening whose loss accumulates quietly over years. Number 15. The kitchen was finished before anyone sat down for the evening. After dinner, the kitchen was dealt with before the evening began. This was not discussed. It was not subject to negotiation. It simply happened, because the alternative was a kitchen that waited in the background all evening like an unspoken argument. Dishes were washed. The stove was wiped. Leftover food was put away. The dishcloth was wrung out and hung properly. The trash, if it was full, was dealt with. The kitchen came to a close for the day, which meant that for the rest of the evening, no one had to think about it. This habit served two purposes. The obvious one was a clean kitchen in the morning, but the less obvious one was an evening that could actually be an evening. When the kitchen is finished, the mind stops returning to it. There is no background awareness of a task left incomplete. There is no mild guilt attached to sitting on the couch and reading a book. The day's work is done, and the person who did it has genuinely earned the rest that follows. Modern households often do the opposite. The evening begins with the kitchen still open, and it becomes a task that looms quietly over the first hour of rest until either someone deals with it or everyone goes to bed and agrees to face it in the morning. But morning is hard enough without the previous evening's dishes waiting at the sink. The old habit protected the evening by finishing the day properly before sitting down to enjoy it. Number 16, a small task was done purely for the next day. Before the evening fully settled into rest, many 1950s women did one small thing that had nothing to do with what had already happened, and everything to do with what was coming. Tomorrow's bread was set to rise overnight. A library book that needed to be returned was placed near the door. A shirt for school tomorrow was checked and laid out. An item that had been borrowed and needed to go back to a neighbor was placed in a visible spot where no one would forget it. A birthday card, already written and addressed, was placed near the front door to be mailed in the morning. These were not large tasks. Individually, none of them took more than 2 or 3 minutes. But together, they represented a particular way of thinking about time that ran underneath the entire 1950s household system. The good day is not just a day that went well. It is a day that left the next one a little easier. This habit is perhaps the clearest expression of the invisible intelligence behind a well-run home. It is easy to take care of today. Almost anyone can manage the present moment when there is no choice. The real skill, the skill that made some households feel perpetually ahead rather than constantly catching up, was in the small, deliberate acts of caring for tomorrow, while today still had energy left to do it. Number 17. The evening ended at roughly the same time every night. This final habit held all the others together in a way that is easy to underestimate until you have experienced what its absence does to a household. In many 1950s homes, the evening had an end, not a rigid one enforced by authority, but a natural, consistent rhythm that meant the household moved toward sleep at roughly the same time each night. Children had bedtimes that were real and mostly kept. The house quieted down. The remaining lights were turned off room by room. The day closed. This mattered in ways that extended far beyond sleep itself, though sleep mattered enormously. A household that ends its day at a consistent time, wakes up to a consistent morning. The body and mind that go to bed before they are exhausted are different in the morning from the body and mind that stayed up until they could not stay awake any longer. And a household where Tuesday night ends, always starts Wednesday with more energy, more patience, more capacity for whatever the next day needs to hold. The discipline of ending the evening was not about restriction. It was about protecting everything that would come after it. A well-ended Tuesday made Wednesday morning possible without panic, and Wednesday made Thursday, and Thursday carried the household quietly forward into the weekend, not from a place of exhaustion and relief, but from something closer to steadiness. That steadiness was the real product of a 1950s Tuesday. Not a spotless house, not a perfect schedule, but a day that moved without rushing and ended without regret, and handed the next morning something to work with instead of something to survive. Looking back across all 17 of these habits, the picture that emerges is not of a rigid, joyless day built around chores. It is of a day with a shape. It began the night before. It started without panic. It named its most important work and built the rest of the day around that. It closed the kitchen twice, once after breakfast and once after dinner. It moved laundry on a schedule. It straightened before it cleaned. It gave the afternoon to children and to quiet prevention. It began dinner early enough that the end of the day could arrive without a crisis. It closed the house properly before bed. And it left one small thing ready for the morning that followed. None of these habits required exceptional discipline. They required the decision, made once, to give each part of the day a job, and then to follow that job long enough that it stopped feeling like a decision and started feeling like the way the house simply moved. We say again what we always say when looking back at these old systems, because it always deserves to be said. The women who built these routines were not doing it out of happiness or ease. Many of them were doing it under real pressure, carrying more than their share and receiving little recognition for the enormous, invisible labor that made a house feel like a home. We do not need to recreate the social structure of that era to borrow what worked. What worked was the shape, the day with a direction, the house with a rhythm, the week that moved forward rather than lurching. If this brought back a memory of a house that felt that way when you were younger, or made you wonder what your own Tuesday might look like with a little more shape to it, then something worth remembering has been passed along. Thank you for spending this Tuesday with us. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe before you go. There are many more of these forgotten rhythms worth remembering, and we will keep looking for them.